Yeah,
his
this is
race,
Michael
even though he
Warkin
lost.
here for On Second Thought Television. I'm here in Las Vegas at the Freedom Fest with,
Nick Tumbelides with U.S. Term Limits.
and you are a proponent of exactly what?
I'm a proponent of restoring Congress to the people. You know, this country was intended to have a citizen legislature where folks would go to Washington, D.C. for a short time, do the right thing, change the system before it changes them, and then come home to live under the laws that they make. It has mutated into a professional political class. We need to end that. We need to get a citizen legislature back in place again.
And the proposal that you have for that is what?
It's 3 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate.
So you're advocating for term limits, and can you explain to people what term limits are?
Yeah, term limits is the idea that you can't run for re-election in perpetuity. We have term limits on the president. The president is limited to 8 years in office. We have 36 governors with term limits, 15 state legislatures, 9 of the 10 largest cities in America. Congress doesn't have term limits. What's so special about them? Why do members of Congress get to serve in office for life? 82% of Americans want term limits on Congress. I think it's time that we give it to them.
Okay. So a person runs for office and they get elected, and basically the theory that you have is they stay in there with really no competition whatsoever.
Exactly right. The longer an incumbent is in office, the harder it becomes to get them out of office. It's like pulling a sword from a stone. Congress has a 10% approval rating, but a 95% re-election rate. To me, that's a sign of a horribly dysfunctional and broken system. We have to chart a new course. It would be great if we could say to ourselves, more time in office makes them better at their jobs. It doesn't. They get worse. We get more dysfunction because they spend most of their time raising money for re-election instead of doing their real jobs.
So what you're advocating for, and I put this out here, so it's agency. So the people or the voters want to make sure that the person that they send to Washington, D.C. has the interest of them, right?
Correct.
And you're saying given enough time in D.C., they lose that.
Exactly right. They stop listening to the voters. They stop talking to their constituents. There have been studies showing that the opinions of the average American have absolutely no impact at all on what gets passed and what doesn't get passed in Congress. If you had a citizen legislature, they would be a lot more responsive to the people.
And you believe that term limits would be the key way to do that.
Absolutely.
Back to the agency issue, and what you're saying is we don't have agency, we actually have what I guess people would term as capture.
I believe we do. Yeah, I believe we have a political class and we are under capture. If we want to transfer power back to the citizens, term limits is the way to do it. It will make elections more competitive. It will crack down on corruption. It will reverse the incentives in Washington, D.C., so people go there mindful of what their constituents want rather than trying to build an empire and climb the ladder of seniority.
So let me play devil's advocate. There's another proposal that's out there. Basically, the idea is that the district size matters. And originally, I believe the biggest debate was 40,000 versus 30,000. And George Washington said 40,000, which they had proposed, was not adequate to protect the liberties of the citizen. And they said that the congressional district should sit at 30,000. And what are the districts at now?
The average district size, I think, is about 750,000.
Which is about
For the U.S. House.
which is about 25 times larger than what the founders said that the maximum size should be.
Yeah, I think it's a problem because when a district is that big, a member of Congress or a candidate for Congress can't bootstrap their way into office. You can't knock on 700,000 doors. And so the reliance in getting elected becomes on PACs and special interests. PACs and special interests give about $10 to incumbents for every $1 that they give to challengers. That produces a rigged system, produces barriers to entry where ordinary people can't run for office. That's another thing that term limits would also address. But I agree with you, districts should be a lot smaller.
Okay, and the fact that we haven't added more reps, but the population has grown, it means both the voters' vote loses value, but also how do the congressional members get their work done at this time?
What work?
Well, I mean, they do get work done, so obviously one man can't handle it, so he takes on a staff, right?
I think congressmen are delegating so much of their work to their staff and to the bureaucrats because, like we said, they spend 70% of their working time raising money. Every day, every Congress member on average leaves Capitol Hill, leaves their office, walks a few blocks down to a call center where they spend 5 hours on average each day on the phone, dialing for dollars, raising money either for their next reelection or to pay off the party so that they can get a prime spot on a committee. They're not reading the 1,000-page bills. They're not doing their jobs. They're delegating all of that to the staff, and they're passing the buck to the bureaucrats, because when something goes wrong, they can blame the bureaucrats. They can blame the administrative state instead of taking responsibility for their own errors.
And who elects this? Who elects the staff members?
Well, the congressman would select their own staff members, but the bureaucracy is unelected, and there have been some of them probably who've been appointed by presidents who were laid in the ground 40 years ago. So it really is the fourth branch of government. We have the largest bureaucratic state in the history of the world in terms of the dollars that we spend on it. It gobbles up 20% of our gross domestic product. We've got 2.5 million federal employees. Something has to give. We need members of Congress to exercise their power and take responsibility and start reducing that bureaucracy.
So the agency issue. So there's a little bit, definitely what you're saying is term limits. You believe that would return it, and you believe that district size might also be an issue.
I think both are solutions to the puzzle. Nothing is a silver bullet, but what we're doing right now absolutely isn't working. The status quo is broken. We've got to take charge.
And I don't think anybody's, really surprised about what you're saying.
No, not at all. In fact, like I said, 82% of Americans want term limits, but what might surprise some people is it's also the most bipartisan issue in America. It's got support from 89% of Republicans, 76% of Democrats, and 83% of independents. The only people in our country who don't like this issue are the permanent political class that would be affected by it. But we have to overcome their self-interest. We need to unify as a country and get this done because it's too important not to.
Well, there you have it. Here I'm with U.S. Term Limits and their thoughts on the matter. Thank you very much for giving your comments. Do you have a plug or anything?
Thank you. Yeah, if you want to learn more about term limits, if you want to get involved as a volunteer, go to termlimits.com. That's our website.
Okay, we much appreciate it. Back to you, Wagner, in the studio. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nick and Michael.